Just hours after adding a conservative to the Supreme Court, President Trump loses a cabinet member. Today, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley offered her resignation, which will go into effect at the end of the year. Following effusive praise from her boss, who was sitting next to her at the announcement, Haley denied speculation of a presidential run, at least for now.
It has been an honor of a lifetime. It has really been a blessing, and I want to thank you for that. No, I'm not running for 2020. I can promise you what I'll be doing is campaigning for this one.
Trump said he will name Haley's successor in the next 2 or 3 weeks, but that wasn't the only shift happening in Trump world. Today, Brett Kavanaugh spent his first day on the job as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Last night, Kavanaugh took part in a White House swearing-in ceremony, where a week after blaming the Clintons and outside left-wing opposition groups, he promised to remain independent.
My goal is to be a great justice for all Americans and for all of America. I will work very hard to achieve that goal. I was not appointed to serve one party or one interest, but to serve one nation.
His contentious confirmation may have mobilized voters on both sides of the aisle, which may put a damper on the so-called blue wave. A new NPR poll found 80% of GOP voters saying the November elections are, quote, very important, nearly matching Democrats' 82% intensity. In July, the gap was 10 points. And GOP leaders are giving Kavanaugh credit for the boost.
What I think this has done for us is provide the kind of adrenaline shot that we had not been able to figure out how to achieve in any other way.
The Republican base is definitely animated after this.
Of course, other polling, including CNN's today, continues to show Democrats with significant leads on Republicans in generic ballot matchups. But what do all these shifts 28 days out mean for Democratic hopes of reclaiming Congress? Congressman Joe Kennedy will try to answer those questions now. Congressman, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me back.
So you've been campaigning all over the country. We'll get to that in a minute. In response to the Kavanaugh hearings, people like your colleague Jerry Nadler, who would become the chair of the Judiciary Committee should the Democrats control the House, says we're going to hold hearings into sexual misconduct, into possible perjury from Kavanaugh. Others of your colleagues say we're going to move to impeach Kavanaugh. Others say we're going to pack the court. Do you support those kinds of tactics and that sort of campaign strategy 28 days out?
Look, I think if the question is, should there be accountability for somebody that is going to be on the Supreme Court for the rest of his life about whether, one, he engaged in some sort of sexual misconduct, two, whether he's truthful with the Senate Judiciary Committee, and three, truthful with the American public as a federal judge sitting under oath. And there's ample evidence out there to show that he wasn't. I think making sure the American people and Congress understands exactly what happened, and if there was malfeasance, that he's held accountable, I think is the very least of what we should expect out of our Supreme Court. So absolutely, I've got those concerns. I think that's a discussion we should be having. But Jim, I think, look, as important as the Kavanaugh hearings were for this country, and as upset and frustrated and angry I was watching Dr. Ford testify and see my Senate Republican colleagues that morning give her credence and credibility, and then that afternoon dismiss all of it and somehow sit there and say, I believe her, but I just don't think it happened. Well,
it didn't happen by him.
Right.
She was sexually assaulted was the new line, but not by Kavanaugh.
But then you don't believe her because she said with 100% certainty that it was him. So you can't have it both ways. What I think that on top of the 18 months that we have seen under a Trump administration that has targeted healthcare, that is targeting our decency, that has targeted science, that has targeted education, that has targeted equality. This is not just an election based off of Kavanaugh. This is an election based off of the character and integrity of the American public. That's why people are fired up, and that's why we're going to win.
But you're a pretty strategic kind of guy. Let me show you a couple of polls. The CNN poll I mentioned today. Which party's candidate would you prefer in Congress? Large margin, 13% Democrat. Again, that's generic. Party preference by gender is just insane. 5% men pro-Republican. 30%, 63 to 33% women. Do you not worry that with, let's call it the Nadler agenda, I know it's not now, but this notion that, yes, there has to be accountability, yes, there have to be hearings. Do you not worry that people are going to say, I can't handle, I may be upset by what happened. I don't want more tension. I don't want more yelling. I don't want more screaming at hearings. And that's what we're going to get with the Democrats in the House.
No, Jim, I think, look, Do I think everybody across this country wishes the partisanship would come down? Yes. Do I think people want their government to work? Yes. Do I think that the responsibility of our government is to find ways to build a legislative consensus to actually pass legislation? Yeah, that's literally the point of Congress. There's also accountability. There's also trying to make sure that we live up to those standards that we've set and that our forebears have set. And I think you can, in fact, do both. And I think this is not just saying when Mr. Nadler says that this is going to be part of the agenda, he's not saying that's the only thing on the agenda. He's saying that's part of the agenda. And I think making sure that a Supreme Court justice told the truth in his confirmation hearings is a pretty big deal.
So can you imagine a situation after these hearings where there might be a move to remove Justice Kavanaugh from the Supreme Court?
Can I imagine it? Sure, I can imagine it. I can imagine that if a Supreme Court justice, a sitting federal judge, lied about his background and to the United States Senate, and by extension the American public, during his confirmation proceedings for the Supreme Court, Jeff Flake even said that his truthfulness was going to be determinative as to whether he should get confirmed or not. Mr. Flake, in my mind, backed out on that promise. But I think making sure that the American public knows exactly what happened is an important goal.
One last thing on this. Do you accept that the Democrats have partial responsibility for this? And I'll tell you what I mean. If this 60 vote threshold in the Senate had existed, like it did for decades, let me get the question out first, then you can shake your head while I'm asking. It was the Democrats who started this train down the track. In 2013, when the Democrats controlling the Senate reduced the threshold to a bare majority for all judges and executive appointments other than Supreme Court, well, the train was advanced a couple of miles by the Republicans when they added Supreme Court to the list.
Jim, so a couple of things. One, recognize that Democrats were forced to lower that threshold for appointments for federal judges and other administrative appointments because we couldn't get Republicans to go along, Senate colleagues couldn't get Republicans to go along with anything under an Obama agenda. Anything. Remember, Mitch McConnell was very clear that his goal after Obama got sworn in was to make President Obama a one-term president. That was it. And so when were forced with that obstruction, you have Harry Reid saying, I can let Senate Republicans essentially hijack this process as the minority party, or you can lower that threshold to at least get these people in positions. But he made an essential and important distinction between a lifetime tenure for the Supreme Court of the United States, and he even said, given that circumstance, we're not going to go that far. Mitch McConnell, obviously, as you well know, held a seat open for over a year with Merrick Garland, breaking Senate tradition, even though he likes to say otherwise, has now backtracked on that promise to try to leave a door open such that if there is an opening in 2020, he could try to squeeze an additional justice onto the court, and destroyed, in my mind, the rest of the important, not just speed bumps, but some of the barriers of the integrity of the process. And let's be clear about this. When it comes to your question, I think it's important to make sure that we don't look at that just in the vacuum. This is the same Senate Majority Leader and Mitch McConnell that when confronted by John Brennan, the then head of the CIA who served Democratic and Republican administrations, that Russia was interfering in our election to help Donald Trump at the expense of Hillary Clinton, Mitch McConnell said that if he went public with it, he would attack it. He would say that this was a political ploy by Obama to actually help Hillary Clinton. Mitch McConnell has been at the heart of numerous attempts to undermine the character and integrity and bipartisan nature of our Senate now for years. And we're seeing the repercussions of it.
So I guess you don't agree with my premise. Is that what you're saying?
I do not agree with your premise.
Three very quick things, not that they don't matter. They do a lot. You're on the Energy Committee, and you co-authored a letter in the wake of this Columbia gas thing. But I want to talk about something that happened since very quickly.
Which we haven't gotten a response to yet, so we'll keep...
About holding a hearing. No. Woburn today, another problem with National Grid. I don't understand how elected leaders can allow a utility company, a public utility company, to lock out its workers so that people who do not have experience can overpressurize a line and potentially put all the people in a city at risk.
This has to get fixed. This has to get fixed now. This is not just a question of what we've seen in Woburn, the challenges we saw, obviously with somebody else, but with Columbia Gas, the story that we saw in the Boston Globe over the weekend of developers that are now forced to wait months, if not potentially a year, to get families moved into new construction, to new homes, because, in part, of this lockout. This has got to stop. And I sure hope that National Grid's able to come to a resolution soon.
One positive thing here that seems there's not much positive news to talk about. You've been fighting for this mental health parity stuff forever. And one, explain it briefly if you would. And my understanding is both houses in wildly bipartisan fashion have passed this thing, and it's about to go to Trump's desk. Is that correct?
So yes, some portion of it. So mental and behavioral health has been a priority of mine, and it's one of these challenges, unfortunately, around the country that affects far more people than people think. About 20% of all Americans suffer with mental and behavioral illness. And probably the aspect of this that's getting the most attention of late is with the opioid epidemic and addiction services. But it's far more prevalent than that. Our response as a nation has been woefully inadequate. I've been fighting along with a couple of colleagues to try to push Congress to do much more, and we're not even coming close. There is a broad package of some reforms that are fine. They're a half step forward, but they are only a half step. Included in that package is a bill that, yes, I'm proud of, to make sure, get this, that pregnant women and kids, poor kids, are guaranteed access to mental and behavioral health services. Under existing legislation, that guarantee was not guaranteed. So this tries to make sure that it is guaranteed. And yes, that flew through Congress, and I'm proud of that. But
will Trump sign this thing?
Yes, he will. And look, there's been a number of Republican colleagues that were great on this issue, and I want to give them credit for it. But the bottom line is the largest payer of addiction services in the country is Medicaid. And you cannot sit there and say that you are taking on the opioid crisis, that you're trying to expand access to mental behavioral health, and then turn around and cut Medicaid by the tune of nearly $1 trillion or repeal the Affordable Care Act. That does not work. The math does not work. The logic does not work. And I would hope that at some point our Republican colleagues are going to shift on this.
We only have 30 seconds left. You met your wife in a Harvard Law School class, is that right?
I did.
Okay, and that professor said that after the elections, she's going to consider running for president.
Yeah, she did.
That would be Elizabeth Warren.
That would be.
Are you in the same class of people, meaning post-midterms? I'm serious about this. I know you don't like talking about this, but 2020 is not. No. Are you somebody who also is going to look at this post-elections?
No. I've got absolutely no plans.
Is this a Sherman-esque kind of statement?
No. I am not looking at it. I don't know what would change for me to look at it. I think that there's an awful lot of folks from Massachusetts that might be looking at it, and I think all of them would make great presidents.
How was she as a professor, by the way?
Spectacular.
Joe Kennedy, it's nice to see you.
Hey,
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Congressman Kennedy.